The Healthcare Labyrinth podcast is back for another episode. Join Mark S. Ryan, a veteran health plan and health technology executive, as he explores the world of healthcare.
Welcome, everyone, to this edition of the Healthcare Labyrinth podcast. My name's Mark Ryan, and it's a pleasure to be hosting the podcast, and thanks to everyone for listening in. Last week, I told you about the next 15 drugs in Medicare drug price negotiations and what President Trump might do or should do. I noted that Trump has a great opportunity to further Medicare drug price negotiations by expanding and applying it to commercial and employer coverage as well. I said Trump's populism will likely prevail over his somewhat friendlier relationship with Big Pharma than the Biden administration had. After some communications from all of you, I am going to expand a bit on last week's topic. I'm going to double down on why I think Trump will take my advice and embrace drug price reform with vigor. I see a sea change coming on drug pricing from Trump 47. The podcast will go much deeper into why I think Trump's populism will win out on the issue to help the average American afford his or her medication. As usual, we'll take our 3 breaks and break this up into 4 parts, so let's get right into the podcast. There is no doubt that President Trump is famous for his fluidity on issues. He is unpredictable on healthcare, and that is not more true than on drug price reform. At various points of Trump 45, the president was proposing radical drug price controls that had never been seen before from a Republican president. In the case of Medicare Part B, he proposed that providers negotiate prices for such medically administered drugs as an international reference pricing scheme rolled out over time. What's more, he wanted most favored nation pricing, so the U.S. price would be pegged to the lowest price in the rest of the world. The proposal did not go anywhere in the end because of major process issues, but at the time, Trump said he would do the same in Medicare Part D, the retail drug program. Since leaving office and returning, Trump has been a bit all over the map on drug price reform. In one breath, he has signaled abandonment of such proposals and exhibited greater friendliness for Big Pharma brand drug makers. In the next breath, Trump is declaring that maybe, just maybe, he will attack drug prices after all. So where does Trump stand on drug price reform? It's a tough question and may depend on the last policymaker he speaks with. His administration is a curious mix of traditional Republican policymakers and adherents of Make America Great Again populism. But if I were to bet, I would argue the populism in Trump may win over on the more traditional free market guys in his administration. Not that I think the drug market is a free market at all, and we'll talk more about that later. There are some signs that the populist part of Trump is winning out already on the issue of drug price reform. In late January, Trump's new Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services actually issued a statement in support, soft as it was, of continuing Medicare drug price negotiations. This was a big blow to Big Pharma, which had hoped that it could convince Trump to ignore, slow roll, or sabotage the law, if not repeal it outright. Trump's CMS statement did commit to greater transparency and stakeholder input, though. And then we saw the president in a Fox News Super Bowl interview being the truly populist Trump on drug prices. Trump went out of his way to mention weight loss drugs, the popular GLP-1s that list at roughly $1,000 or more per month supply on a gross price basis. They are prescribed for those with various disease states such as diabetes and cardiovascular disease to help people lose weight and get their conditions under control. By all indications, they work. Indeed, although I remain skeptical of the safety of GLP-1s given their relative newness, this intrepid podcaster went on a GLP-1 targeted for his type 2 diabetes, as his hemoglobin A1C has been inching above 7.0. I have lost about 50 pounds in under a year being on the drug. My cholesterol and triglycerides are now well within the normal range. My hemoglobin A1C dropped dramatically and is at the low end of the pre-diabetic range. I tell my wife I now have the physique of a 20-year-old. I've yet to receive a reaction from her, though. So I am slowly converting to thinking that GLP-1s can help those with disease states control them, and mass use could improve the health of the population as a whole. More and more people without underlying disease states are taking GLP-1s as well simply for weight loss. Just look at Hollywood. Some employer groups allow coverage for just obesity, even if an underlying disease state is not present. The outgoing Biden administration proposed coverage just for obesity in Medicare Part D. The problem is that spending on such drugs is surging for employers, Medicare, and Medicaid. What's more, while rebates are issued to pharmacy benefits managers by brand drug makers in return for formulary placement and looser prior auth requirements, the cost sharing on GLP-1 drugs mean they are inaccessible to most Americans. Rebates don't make it to the point of sale in whole or at least part. Still, the drugs have been in shortage at certain points given their popularity. The shortages as well as high prices have led to a thriving telehealth industry that compounds generic versions of the drugs. This could be shut down, though, at any time as brand makers say it violates patent rights, at least once they address their supply issues as they seem to be doing. Even then, the compound generics are often not covered by insurance and can cost hundreds of dollars a month. Back to Trump's comments on GLP-1s in his Super Bowl interview. In discussing potential tariffs that could drive up drug and medical device costs, he argued prices could rise in the short term, but they would ultimately be lower. He singled out GLP-1s, calling them the so-called fat drug, and seemed to imply he intends to try to end the fundamental unfairness of high drug prices in America for GLP-1s compared with other developed countries. Trump used the example of Ozempic costing $88 a month in the United Kingdom, while it is $1,200 a month in America. Trump's rough prices are entirely accurate and represents what he said were GLP-1 prices that are roughly 10 times more in America than in other developed countries. Trump said the U.S. has been too nice on the issue of drug prices. With that introduction, we'll take our first break and we'll come back to continue our discussion on why I think Trump and his populism will thoroughly endorse drug price reform in the future. Be right back.
Health plans and insurance are confusing. Our healthcare system is in dire need of reform. Health policy expert Mark Ryan tackles both issues in his book, The Healthcare Labyrinth. It is both a guide to navigating health plans and fixing American health insurance. Mark dives deep into how health plans and the American health insurance system operate. He then outlines a comprehensive reform agenda for the system as a whole, including pricing, emphasizing health and care management, and ensuring affordable access to health coverage and a private delivery model. Mark is a bit of an unconventional Republican in that he believes affordable access is the morally right thing to do, and that it is also fiscally prudent for our nation. Learn more about Mark's book, The Healthcare Labyrinth, at healthcarelabyrinth.com or search at leading bookseller websites. Available in print, ebook, and audiobook forms.
Welcome back, and we hope you're enjoying this episode of the Healthcare Labyrinth podcast. We're talking about Donald Trump's discussion about GLP-1 weight loss drugs and its broader implications on drug price reform and where he might go. So how significant was Trump's statement in the Super Bowl interview? Well, I think it was very significant. Rarely do you ever see a president get so specific on such policies. The king of sound bites was articulating hardcore facts in this case. Trump has obviously studied the issue. He knows almost exact prices in the U.S. compared with other developed nations. He has already honed a policy viewpoint. The price disparity is intolerable and is unfair. More importantly, the argument on drug costs ties directly to his view that Americans are taken for a ride every day by other nations. He wants to attack the inequity on many fronts. Stop jobs being exported from the U.S. only to have goods come back to be sold in America. Stop unfair tariffs levied by other countries in their domestic markets, as well as domestic subsidies, which hurt U.S. goods and American consumers. Stop market manipulation and intellectual property theft that hurt American competitiveness and growth. In general, stop other nations taking advantage of Americans simply because they are the biggest consumer market in the world. Taken further, Trump also believes that other nations and foreign companies should pay a premium because they earn so much from American consumers. Why shouldn't Americans get a further discount if others are making money on us, he might ask. Now, I am not a Trump tariff guy by any means. I also find Trumpian economics to be discordant, but there is little question it resonates with Americans. The current free market paradigm seems to hurt the common man because it is poorly executed. Americans see Trump's economics as an alternative to the ongoing pain. Within this vein, Trump is saying drug prices in other developed nations are discriminatory to Americans, and the disparity with America must be addressed. Big Pharma has lobbied against any type of reasonable price negotiations in America, given our market size. Why? Because 2/3 to 3/4 of drug profits in a given year come from the American market due to high prices and artificially low ones in other nations. Brand drug makers are happy to adopt low prices in other nations as it is gravy for them. It adds to their margin if they are part of other developed countries' negotiated formularies and prices, but they make their money in America. Unfortunately, my Republican Party is totally sold out to Big Pharma. While Big Pharma contributes huge sums to both parties, the GOP is seen as the bulwark by brand drug makers. Except for the Inflation Reduction Act's Medicare drug price negotiations, GOP votes have always stymied drug price reforms. My party labors under the illusion that somehow the drug market is a free market. It is not. Price is not governed by supply and demand, but by numerous stakeholders in an opaque and perverse drug channel. My party also seems to believe that private sector innovation will shut down if we fiddle with drug prices. But here are several points to counter their unfettered belief in market principles that I don't believe exist in the drug market. The GOP fails to account for the huge investment governments make in innovation. The launch prices of drugs give no credit for the considerable public investment. Brand drug makers are more interested in innovating their bottom lines. That is not to say that you cannot find evidence that brand drug makers make people's lives better. They show us these examples every day on TV, even as they sell their wares. But too much, if not most of it, is tied to increasing margins and investor wealth and focusing on the most pressing health crises. Instead of engaging in serious discussions on price and rationalizing it, Big Pharma has conspired with other drug channel stakeholders to manipulate price to further advantage them in the U.S. market and drive margins. And last point, couldn't prices be lower if other developed nations paid their fair share of innovation worldwide? With that, we'll take our second break and we'll come back to continue our discussion on Trump's populism and Medicare drug price negotiations. Be right back.
Lilac Software is proud to work with the Healthcare Labyrinth website to educate people on the healthcare system. At Lilac, we believe transparency is so important in healthcare. The healthcare system is opaque, and Lilac is trying to bring clarity to data and unleash the best member care, reduce costs, and improve outcomes. Our cloud-native payer platform revolutionizes data insights and analytics. Plans have all the data they need, but in silos locked away in point solutions. At Lilac, we solve the data fragmentation problem and help plans turn complex data into actionable insights, leading to greater operating leverage, tight cost controls, and healthier members. Health plans can improve STAR scores, reduce medical expense, drive revenue, and more. Quite simply, with Lilac, you can drive better business and health outcomes. Learn more at lilacsoftware.com.
Welcome back. We hope you're enjoying this episode of the Healthcare Labyrinth podcast. We're talking about Trump's populism and what he may do on Medicare drug price negotiations. Let's talk a little more on the subject by introducing the concept of the foreign brand drug makers. Many drug makers are not even based in the U.S. A majority of the 50 biggest drug companies are foreign firms. Foreign big pharma companies have become heroes in their native countries for how they disadvantage American consumers and drive their nation's wealth. Take the second largest drug maker in the world, which is just behind America's Eli Lilly. Novo Nordisk is a Danish company which makes Ozempic and Wegovy. Consider their and Denmark's recent financial statistics. In 2023, Novo Nordisk had about $34 billion in revenue. About $25 billion of it, or just short of 3/4, came from the two GLP-1 drugs it makes, Ozempic and Wegovy. In 2023, Novo Nordisk had a profit of $12 billion, or 35%, the largest it has since 1989. In Q4 2024, Novo said sales increased 30% year over year, primarily because of GLP-1 sales. Denmark's exports increased by 13.4% in 2023 and were forecast to jump again by 7.4% in 2024. Why? You guessed it, Novo's GLP-1 drugs. In December 2024, Denmark, with about 6 million people, revised its gross domestic product growth upwards from 1.9% as of August to 3%. It also revised GDP growth for 2025 from 2.2% to 2.9%. 30,000 people work for Novo Nordisk in Denmark. In 2023, Novo Nordisk accounted for 20% of Denmark's employment growth. And last, as of September 2024, Novo Nordisk's market cap was over $600 billion, which is more than Denmark's annual gross domestic product. In sum, whether it is its people, economy, or national budget, Denmark is getting richer off the backs of Americans through high drug prices. The same can be said of other brand drugs and other foreign brand drug makers. In testimony before Congress in September, Lars Jorgensen, the CEO of Novo Nordisk, argued that more than 80% of U.S. patients with insurance coverage for Ozempic or Wegovy are paying $25 or less for each prescription, and 90% of U.S. patients pay $50 or less. But it is propaganda that misses a few critical points. For the most part, only the well-insured have access to these expensive drugs, whether via liberal formula or because cost sharing is low enough for a patient to afford the drug. And as noted above, employer groups and even government programs have been reluctant to expand coverage and lower costs due to the obscene prices and how they soak up more and more of the drug spending pie. So the statistic overall given by the CEO is meaningless, another twisted fabrication of Big Pharma. And whatever the cost sharing and coverage, with or without big rebates, the entire healthcare system in the U.S. pays the cost of very high prices. In the same testimony, the CEO went out of his way to discuss the massive investments Novo has made in developing the drug. No doubt it was sizable, and certainly companies deserve a reward for the risks they take on in bringing drugs to the market. But two more points. First, a Yale study found that it costs less than $5 a month to manufacture a GLP-1. So that is a markup of at least 200 times against the list prices of these drugs. Certainly, there is a reason to believe Novo Nordisk and other GLP-1 manufacturers can be rewarded reasonably for their innovation investment and risk at a price point less than $1,000 or more a month. Remember again that Novo had an amazing margin of 35%. Second, even in the context of innovation investment, how does one reconcile the excessively high price in America compared with the negotiated prices in other nations? Jorgensen, in essence, is arguing that Americans alone should pay for innovation because every other developed country has negotiated very low prices. That clearly is inequitable. With that, we'll take our last break and we'll come back for a conclusion.
The Healthcare Labyrinth is no ordinary website. It features news and commentary from one of the nation's leading healthcare policy and technology experts. Mark Ryan combs the internet for the latest healthcare news and publishes a news feed each weekday with summations and Mark's insights. Twice a week, Mark publishes a blog to go deep into a current issue. And of course, Mark hosts a podcast each week to delve even further. All of this is available at healthcarelabyrinth.com. Visit each day for the latest happenings in healthcare. As well, learn more about Mark's book, The Healthcare Labyrinth, at the website. That's healthcarelabyrinth.com, your go-to source for healthcare news.
Welcome back, and we hope you're enjoying this episode of the Healthcare Labyrinth podcast. We'll conclude here with Trump's theme that Americans are being taken for a ride. So again, this ties back to Trump's argument that Americans are taken for a ride every day by other nations. This is most obvious on drug pricing. Whether a drug company is foreign or domestic, the GLP-1 price story repeats itself across all brand drugs. Americans pay manyfold more on average than similarly situated consumers in other developed world nations. Americans have among the lowest, if not the lowest, life expectancies of any developed nation. A lot goes into that, and for sure we can learn a great deal from other nations' healthcare systems and disparities in mortality and morbidity. But at least a part of that discrepancy in life expectancy and health in general is tied to excessive cost in America's health system. This includes drug costs. The excessive drug costs create such a financial burden that many forego medication. They take years off their life and have comparatively poor health when living. Foreigners tend to scorn fat Americans. At the same time, a Brit, Frenchman, Dane, and more live longer and healthier lives because Americans in part subsidize their longer life expectancies. These health systems' money goes further because they are free riding on America's economy and American consumers. So, as I noted in a recent blog, Trump can do a great deal to remedy the disparity on drugs. It is perhaps one of the greatest Make America Healthy Again agenda items. He can push Medicare drug price negotiations further in Medicare and beyond. He can benchmark prices against those other developed countries. And why shouldn't America have the lowest price given the size of its market? While I am dubious of Trump's tariff policy, if it is to be a centerfold of the economy, he could force lower drug prices in return for no or limited tariffs on drugs. Trump often notes we are way too generous, way too nice, as he might say. He complains about other nations freeloading. Mr. President, drug prices are the perfect use case. Stop the freeloading. It is a great economic, health, and political move. Make it the second agenda item on the new MAHA Commission, right after chronic disease. Back in Denmark, the government is happy to live off high GDP and employment growth for now. But leaders are worried that Denmark's over-reliance on Novo Nordisk could be a long-term risk for the economy. They are fretting behind the scenes and trying to plan for change. I think they believe Donald Trump is a fundamentally different leader whose populism throws aside the usual backroom and campaign coffer dominance of Big Pharma in the U.S. We'll see you soon. With that, we'll conclude this edition of the Healthcare Labyrinth podcast. See you next time. Take care.
Thanks for joining Mark and the Healthcare Labyrinth podcast. Go to healthcarelabyrinth.com each day for the latest healthcare news. See you next week on the next Healthcare Labyrinth podcast.